right. So the other movie that we chose, or that I picked for this time as my movie of the year, and I will say, I think the way we talked about this was, kind of pleasurable viewing experiences. So when we decided to pick something, it was either a movie that, that was from this year that we really, really enjoyed, or something that we had just seen this year or rewatched or whatever. Um, and I gotta say, I don't know if it's just because I don't get to the movies as much anymore that I haven't seen as many new movies, and as many 2024 movies that really, really grabbed me. Um, when I watched American Fiction, I just loved it. I just absolutely loved it and thought to myself, this is the kind of movie that they don't really make much anymore, right? It's not a low budget movie, right? I mean, it's I think it was the director's first movie, but it did have quite a few, not huge, not big stars, but known people, right? People that you recognize. There was the wife from Blackish. I'm drawing a blank on her name, but she's also Diana
Right.
Ross's
Tracy
daughter.
Ellis Ross.
There you
Yeah.
go, right? Who's excellent. Probably kind of a sevenish character, keeping
Yep.
on that theme. Starring Jeffrey Wright, who this movie just reminded me of what an incredible actor he was. And, and I can't help but say it, but if he was white, he'd have had a huge career, right? He'd have been an Ethan Hawke kind of character, Sam Rockwell, right? Somebody who's just incredibly talented and manages to find roles steadily and consistently, even if they're not a big star. But Jeffrey Wright's a guy, I first saw him in Basquiat years ago, in which he is amazing. And since I recommended a double feature with Honora and the Florida Project, I'll recommend Basquiat and American Fiction as a double feature, just to see the range of Jeffrey Wright over the course of his career. Right. But the poor guy, I mean, he's been making, James Bond movies, as kind of Felix, the American CIA guy. So never really had the career that I thought he should have. But this was a wonderful vehicle for him, I thought. Um,
Yeah. You don't see him in lead roles too often. He's usually playing
right,
supporting roles.
right, right.
And yeah, this movie showed like he deserves lead roles as much as any A-list actor.
Yes, yes. So I'll tell you what. I'll give a quick description here of the movie American Fiction. And American Fiction is a 2023 satirical comedy drama film written and directed by Cord Jefferson in his directorial debut, based on the 2001 novel Erasure by Percival Everett. I just bought Percival Everett's book James, which is a retelling of Huckleberry Finn that I really want to read. Start Jeffrey Wright as Thelonious Monk Ellison, a frustrated novelist and professor. The story follows Monk, a serious literary author who becomes increasingly frustrated with the publishing industry's narrow expectations of Black literature. After facing multiple rejections for his own work while watching stereotypical books about black trauma achieve commercial success, he sarcastically writes a deliberately outrageous novel under a pseudonym. The book, filled with stereotypes he despises, becomes an unexpected hit, forcing him to confront questions about authenticity, identity, and artistic integrity. The film serves as sharp commentary on the publishing industry, racial expectations in films, and commodification of Black pain in popular culture. It explores themes of authenticity, family relationships, and the complex intersection of art, race, and commerce. Um, the thing I loved so much about this movie, in addition to it being funny, in addition to it being extremely well acted, in addition to it being adult, is that it did not pander to the audience in any way. It expected the audience to be intelligent, which seems so rare. And there are a couple of things that make me say that, right? Number one, they never they never felt the need to explain why everybody calls him Monk, right? The character's name is Thelonious Ellison. Okay. Now, that for me is a little too on the nose, okay, for a fictional black character, right? Uh, it's like, all right, okay, I get your point, right? But everybody calls him Monk, and the reason they call him Monk is because a reference to the jazz musician Thelonious Monk, okay? But they never made that point. And if you didn't know who Thelonious Monk is or was, I'm sorry, and a lot of people don't, then they wouldn't have got that, right? It would not have understood why they're calling him Monk. The other thing, a similar reference, is he writes under the pseudonym Stagger Lee, right? And again, if you did not know that Stagger Lee was a very, um, I want to say famous, but it's not really famous, right? I mean, it's a famous blues song, which means it's not very famous, okay?
Yeah, it's
But
a folk hero.
it's yeah, he's well, he was actually a murderer, right? He was a pimp, and
Oh, right.
yeah, he was a pimp who shot
Yeah,
another guy in a bar fight, and so
a folk villain.
yeah, so uh, but they started. I think the first song written about him was in 1933, and it's been remade over and over again. And in fact, I have been on this quest because um, one of my, I don't know if I'd say favorite musicians, but a musician I always loved is Taj Mahal. And he's done a couple of different versions of the song Stagger Lee, but I heard him do one time in kind of a reggae version with a steel guitar that just blew me away. And I have been looking for that recording ever since and have not been able to find it. It's nowhere, right? So I don't even know if I really heard it at one point or if I just made it up in a dream or something. But anyway, they never take the moment to say, um, well, Stagger Lee is named after the song, blah, blah, blah. And nobody in the movie catches on. Oh, wait a minute. Come on. The guy calling himself Stagger Lee, uh, so again, it expected you to be intelligent. It expected you to know things and didn't stop to explain things to you. And we just don't get movies like that enough anymore. And it also indicates to me that, the theme of this was very much, or I'll say that the character, the lead character, the Jeffrey Wright character, very much a five. And, and that is just five-ish, right? I'm going to say things that, I assume and if you don't, well, go read a freaking book, right? I'm not going to take time to explain this to you, go read a book. Uh, so, uh, so I just love how throughout the movie, again, on display was this theme of striving to feel detached, right? Which is what we, call the type five. He moved across the country to get away from his family because of just, all the drama. He's emotionally detached.
And he was the favorite son. They mentioned
Yes,
that. He was his father's favorite of his three children. And
yes,
even then, it's like, I want to get as far away from this family as I can.
yes,
Family can be a really dirty word to fives because it implies emotional entanglement.
yes.
None of that, please.
Yes, and the only reason he goes back at all is because he's speaking at a conference in Boston where his family lives. So he stops to see them, and his sister dies of a heart attack there, and he is faced with, well, I got to deal with my mother, who is now dipping into dementia and Alzheimer's disease, and I don't want to deal with this. Why is this being dumped on me? How do I get out of this, right? How can I, put this off on somebody else? So very much a five-ish sort of character throughout. Um, Tell me about your reaction and thoughts about American fiction.
Yeah, so well, just sticking on Monk as a five for a second. Thelonious Monk himself was one of the great fives. Like if you ever watch the documentary about him, Straight No Chaser, it's just such a brilliant portrait of who he was, as well as if you listen to his music. Like it's hard now
Yeah.
to appreciate how innovative his music was.
Yes.
But I've read it said about him in jazz histories that like he would do these long cliffhanging pauses and he would create chords that nobody had heard before that seemed to come from nowhere but his own cranium. In addition to having the name Thelonious Sphere Monk, like it was as if he came from another planet altogether, which is how fives can really seem. Like this weird brilliance that doesn't seem to have any antecedents. It's like they just opened a door from another dimension and came in. So that blatant reference is setting the tone for anybody who knows this of like, we're in Five Land, folks.
Right. Right.
Uh, Monk, the character, is extremely intelligent, and that's part of his problem as a character. That's part of what gets him in trouble, is that he aims high with his fiction, as you described. He assumes people have taste and intelligence, and he's got a number of successfully published books, and his new one isn't selling. Why? Because it's about ancient Persia,
Yeah.
and people don't seem to want that. They want stories about the ghetto. So, you know, he's really, there's a scene where he's at a literary conference and he's part of a panel that's, playing to an audience of maybe 10 people.
Yeah.
And it turns out that they're up against this new star author, Sintara Golden, played by Issa Rae, whose novel is called Weeze Lives in the Ghetto. And her interview is happening to hundreds of people. And it turns out she doesn't come from the ghetto at all.
Right. She went to Oberlin, I think, right? Yeah.
Yeah, and then immediately moved to New York and got a job in publishing.
Yeah.
It's like, she's not writing about her own world that she's coming
Right.
from, but later, when confronted about it, she defends her right to attune herself to what the public wants and give them that.
Yeah.
Whereas to a five, that is utterly disgusting. Why would somebody do that? Why would it be expected that I would have to do that?
Yeah.
So he's not interested in reaching a wide audience. He's disdainful of what he sees as the stupidity of the masses, which is another big five thing. Just this sense of like the world is populated almost exclusively by idiots.
Yes.
People who just walk around lapping up whatever's put in front of them and not noticing how bad it is. And somehow I'm expected to function in this world. He's also not interested in social niceties. So he develops a relationship with a woman who lives across the street from his family's beach house. And at one point, she reads and likes the novel that he wrote as a joke, not realizing that it was him. First of all, the secretiveness of him to not tell anyone in his life other than his agent that he wrote that is also very Five.
Right.
Fives are pretty secretive and great at keeping secrets, particularly about themselves. But when he's so unimpressed that this woman, Coraline, I think her name is, read and liked the novel, he just goes off about what a problem is that people like you read this.
Yeah.
And he just kind of just lumps her into a lesser class of human beings, and in doing so, alienates her.
Right.
And that's the end of the relationship. So again, like he has a lot of five characteristics that are exactly the thing that get him into trouble, which is a wonderful thing when you have a protagonist of a certain type, just to see how the less adaptive elements of that type propel the plot forward.
Yeah. And at one point, somebody says to him, one day you'll learn that not being able to relate to people is not a badge of honor. Right. And, boy, talk about on the nose, right? And, very often
For a
this is the
five,
trap.
yeah.
Yeah. This is, the trap that fives fall into is, yeah, I'm not like you. A different way than the four, right? The four has this, I'm not like you, but the five is almost like, I don't even consider you, right? It's like
Right.
you don't, you're not worth making the effort to connect to if it means I've got to be something that I'm not. And I have to do things and say things that I don't feel like doing or saying. Mm. So it's almost like an indifference that turns into disdain. Whereas with the four, it feels like they care, right? They're actively setting themselves against other people, right? So it's a little bit of a different tone, but that's what that's how it comes across. It's a drier and more you use the reference of being an alien, right? And it's not like it's it feels like I've just never figured out how to function here. And so I just don't care anymore. Right.
Right.
I can't be bothered. Which is the heartbreak, right? Because it leads to that alienation that is, the cause of suffering for fives.
And at the same time, that heartbreak is masked behind detachment and
Yes.
indifference.
Mm-hmm.
So with fours, it's pretty easy to sense that the alienation that fours experience causes suffering and sadness, and it's less predicated on people's lack of intelligence. It's more people's lack of taste and
Mhm.
lack of willingness to see what a beautiful, special orchid I am.
Yeah.
Whereas with fives, as you said, it's more dismissive of like, I don't relate to this world. I have no interest in being part of it.
Yeah.
End of story.
And you can see those moments, and there's this wonderful moment that you referred to already when he insults her and she lets him know. And and you can see him processing, ah, I did it again. And you can see him wrestling with the knowledge that he screwed up, like he probably had done many times before, right? They make references, for example, to him having previous relationships, but it's never really talked about all that much. So you just know that he has a history of relationships that don't work out. And probably for that very same reason, right? In that scene over dinner, you can see him, it felt to me that he was reliving all those other times that he had done the same thing, right? But just didn't know how to get out of it.
And we see a version of that at the very top of the movie when he's teaching. So he's a university English professor, or maybe creative writing, or maybe both. And he's
Right.
utterly insensitive
Right.
to his students, and that gets him put on leave.
Right.
And
Yeah. Yeah. Go ahead.
and in both cases, as you describe, like his reaction to those moments, his affect is completely flat,
Yes.
which is very much a five thing. You
Yes.
rarely see him change facial expression throughout the movie,
Right.
which doesn't mean that he gives a bad performance. You can see what's going on. You can see the
Yes.
wheels turning. You can see when his emotions are being impacted.
Yeah.
But what the world sees is this neutral mask of a face.
Right. Right. Yeah, and watching him go through those moments, made me think about the fives that I know and the fives that, I'm close to in life, and watching them do the same thing, right? Of you can see them processing, but their face is a mask, right? And so it's really a fascinating thing because it's almost like you can just see behind the mask. You just, get this glimpse of something, but I think if you didn't know them and if you weren't observing what just happened and you were just looking at their face in that moment, you wouldn't see anything. Right. So
Which is the brilliance of being able to see this in a movie where the
yes,
camera can stay on him
yes,
and close up on him
yeah,
and give it time as we, the audience, can see, oh, he feels something. He regrets saying that. Oh, he
yeah,
wishes he could get her back. He doesn't know how to do it, like that kind of thing.
yeah,
As opposed to if it was in a novel where we can't see him or in a
right.
play where we can't close up on him.
Yeah. One of the other things I liked about the movie and that I thought was five-ish, and again, spoiler alert here. The movie's been out for a while. If you haven't seen it, it's not my fault. So, at the end, it's kind of one of these things where it's the intertwining of fact and fiction almost, right? So he's writing this, as he goes through all this process of writing this book and becoming famous, he gets connected to this Hollywood producer and they want to make it. And then he's having the conversation with the producer towards the end over how to end the story, right? So it's almost like they've not quite broken the fourth wall, but kind of stepped outside of the story in a way to look for a resolution of this story that has been happening. And again, that felt very five-ish to me, right? So it's like up to that point feeling like real life. And then you get this sense that, well, wait a minute, this is all kind of a creation that I'm observing and creating in my head and I'm living it and not living it at the same time, right? Which again, just very, very five-ish. I'm here, I'm engaged, I'm talking to you, and it's like I'm creating this in my head in some way. Mm.
I'm also observing.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
Um,
And the director deliberately, and I don't know if this is consistent in the novel, which I really want to read now. I've never read Percival Everett at all, and now especially with all the buzz that his novel
yeah,
James has received, I'm pretty eager to check out his body of work and see if it's five-ish in general.
yeah,
But so I don't know if this is consistent in the novel, but in the movie, they deliberately deny us the truth of what the character's situation is at the very end.
right.
Did he explode the fiction that Staggar Lee is a fugitive?
Right.
rather than a guy with a doctorate who comes from, a family where all three siblings have doctorates.
Right.
Like, did he divulge himself to the public? Was there a scandal? Like, was the prize taken away? Did the novel sales tank? Did he get back together with Coraline? Like we don't get that kind of
Yes.
like, okay, here's the fictional versions of what might happen, what might give the public what they want cynically, and then we get to find out what really happened. It
Right.
just ends with the fictional version,
Right.
which is basically reminding you as an audience of like, this is a created story. This is not a real person.
Yeah.
And an experience I had watching this for the second time, because I first saw it, I don't know, in February, because it was one of the big Oscar nominees last year, and it did win one, I think, for the script. But then watching it this time, I was much more aware of the writer's manipulation of the story at work. So, as you pointed out, Thelonious is a pretty on-the-nose name for a main character,
Right.
much less than to have people call him Monk, and for his last name to be Ellison,
Right.
which is also the
Right.
last name of Ralph Ellison,
Right.
a great black writer.
Right.
So it's very much not just a wink, it's kind of a bonk on the head of like,
Yes.
boom, this is how it works, right? This is what
Yes.
people want in a novel,
Yes.
right? Right? Because this is a novel, this is not real.
Right.
As well as all of the things that happen of like, okay, let's engineer a situation so that he's on leave, and let's engineer a situation so we have to go back to Boston where his family's from, and let's take his sister out of the picture, and let's have his mother's dementia worsen to the point that now he needs to put her in care and he can't afford it. So he has to accept the success of this prank novel that he wrote, even though it's abhorrent to him. And all of these things, like it was just like the mechanics of it being an engineered story were a lot more visible to me the second time.
Hmm.
And because the ending, I think that was very deliberate, which is also very five.
Yeah. Yeah. You make a point, a good point there about the name. And again, like you said, it was really on the nose, and I would agree. It's not just on the nose; it's a bunk on the head. It's almost as if you named a Western actor Clint Wayne or something, right? It's like, come on, man. It's almost like a hack move, right?
Right.
So it had to be kind of a conscious decision. And what does, again, it's very meta, right? Because it's making a statement in that. And one of the things I really also enjoyed about the movie, and again, I'm very sensitive to, two white guys talking about race here, but it it did not preach about race. It addressed race, but in the way that it must be to live the issues of race when you're black. That it's there all the time. There's nuances, there's subtleties in ways that I certainly don't have to think about, don't have to deal with, etc. But it wasn't on a soapbox necessarily, even though he was kind of railing against the you know the desire to pander to stereotypes and create false authenticity by setting characters in the hood who are who are absentee fathers and people shooting each other and all these sort of things. It still didn't feel like it was lecturing anybody, and I just really, really appreciated that. And again, very five-ish, right? It's, I'm just going to describe what's happening here. I'm not going to moralize about it necessarily. I'm going to let you come to your own conclusions by watching what's happening here, right? So,
And I'm going to trust that you're smart enough to come to those
yes,
conclusions.
yes, yes,
I'm going to demand it.
yes. And to realize that, there's the whole gamut of experience here, right, that we're talking about. And even, at the very end, where, he gets in the car and there's that actor sitting on the bench dressed in character as, an enslaved person. I mean, it maybe ties back to the Percival Everett thing, with Jim. I don't know if that, came before the book or whatever, but that's what kind of popped into my head. So again, it's like, okay, I'm just going to set this image here and I'm going to let you make of it what you will. Right. Which again is what, I don't know, a thoughtful, respectful of its audience movie does. So I'm a
A
big
movie for
fan.
grown-ups.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And just to add to that, a couple of years ago, you and I did an episode about Spike Lee's movies. And something that I got out of watching the movies we discussed and a bunch of other movies of his that I've never seen or was rewatching after many years is that if there's any consistent theme I get from Spike Lee's body of work, it's that there are all kinds of Black people.
Yeah.
And certainly before Spike Lee was making movies, the Black people that you would see in the movies fell into one of maybe two or three categories max.
Right.
And the implication was, and that's what Black people are, folks.
Right.
Whereas in Spike Lee's movies, a Black person might be conservative, they might be liberal, they might be rich, they might be poor, they might be a musician, they might be a writer, they might be
Right.
a car dealer, like all over the place.
Yeah.
They have all kinds of jobs, they have all kinds of levels of education, they have all kinds of body types and priorities and such. And that, even though we don't see that same gamut in American fiction, that was Monk's same point.
Right.
So he rails against, and the term is used once, and I've heard it otherwise, trauma porn. What really galls him about the success of the Sintara Golden's novel, We's Bees Living in the Ghetto, is that he said it flattens us. It makes us seem like we're all one thing, especially when works like that are praised for being important.
Right.
And there's just such sincere support for this from earnest white people, as well as from
Right.
some Black people.
Right.
But just this sense of yeah, these are voices that we haven't heard before. And his point is well, I don't deny that some people live like that is their truth, and that those stories need to be heard, but that's not all of us.
Right.
And there are Black people with PhDs who have passionate opinions about ancient Persia and might want to write a book about it. And shouldn't there be room for that too?
Yeah. Yeah.
His siblings, his sister is an anesthesiologist, and his brother is a plastic surgeon who recently came out as gay. So it's where do those fit in the bank of stereotypes about Black people that we're generally fed by the media?
Right. Right.
Nowhere.
Yeah. Also a huge range in skin color in the siblings, which I couldn't help but notice, right? I was like, wow, that you've got the whole range here. So yeah, agreed. It really portrayed that. It was funny. I had after I watched this, I recommended it to a Black friend of mine, and as he was watching it, he's sending me text messages, and he gets to the title of the book. What was the title of the book that she wrote again?
We's Bees Living in the Ghetto.
Yeah, and
he lives in the ghetto.
He sent me that and the message, with these crying emojis, and he says, "This is just killing me. This is awesome." Just how absurd it was, So anyway, yes, one size does not fit all in any good art, I think, and in real life for sure. All right, good. Anything else about American fiction that we haven't talked about, TJ?
Yeah, one thing that popped for me, I found an overall three-ish vibe. It was like fives looking at the world of threes, and that it really explores what will people do to succeed. What's the significance of awards and reviews and buzz, and how somebody becomes a best-selling author and a literary star? Is there fame and success based on falsity and the notion that the popular thing might very well be empty? So it seemed, like a five critically analyzing the threeness that he sees in the publishing industry and in pop culture at large.
Yeah, particularly in the United States. The U.S. is a very three-ish culture, and I think you're absolutely right that is a great observation. The other one thing I'll point out is that Leslie Uggams, who plays his mother, is a very nice one-ish character, I think. That's kind of on display, and it just dawned on me that she was also in Deadpool, or she's also in Deadpool, where she plays a very, very different character. So again, showing the range of Leslie Uggams in the movies.
Yeah, a great performance, and you're right, very different from what I've seen him do otherwise.
Yeah. All right, good. All right, so that I think that kind of wraps us up. So really, really good picks, really enjoyable, grown-up, challenging, interesting movie choices for this episode. I really encourage people to go out and watch these two movies and the other movies that we referenced. You will find it time very well spent. And the next time we talk, which will be soon, we're going to be talking about our TV picks from the year. And, I think we'll hold that. We'll surprise people with what they are. Okay. All right. This was fun, TJ. Till next time.
Thank you so much. Always fun.
Whoops.